Well, hey everyone, it's Hudson, and welcome to this video on how to set up your Z5 II. It's going to be a longer video. I'm doing something a little bit new this time around with suggesting that you download my setup file. It's got all the settings camera wide as I set them up in my camera, and you can upload those into your camera. There are instructions on how to do that over on the website. You just click right here and go to the free download section of my website. You can download the Z5 II settings, upload them into your camera, and follow along with me. And then the great thing is that if there's a setting that I would choose differently than you can just pause the video, change the setting to your taste, but not have to frantically go through changing all the settings following along as I'm talking. So I think that can be really helpful. This will be one of two videos. In this video, I'll comprehensively run through all the menus in the camera and explain a lot of the functions and demystify some things that you might be confused about. The second video is going to show how to customize and set up two of the user modes. I'll leave one for you, but we'll set up user 3 for action sports, wildlife shooting, some really cool customizations of the autofocus settings. And user 2 we'll set up for landscape, just locked down and complete control. So that video you can find linked at the end of this video. I'll link it at the very end, all right? Because it really relies on you going through all these settings and getting the base settings set before you run over and do that. As always, links to this camera and recommended accessories like this power bank I'm powering it with as I do this video are always over at my website at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. You can click right here to go to that as well. And those links help me out, so I thank you in advance for using them. All right, so let's just jump in. I had a little issue with this recording yesterday, so I've got a little wardrobe change. We're actually shooting the menu run through the next day. This will be a longer video. I'm going to gloss over some things like flash shooting and portrait shooting and video stuff. I'll go quickly through those, but it's going to be a long, comprehensive video. So let's jump in. All right, so when I go into the menus, you can go left, right, up and down with the D-pad, and we can always move across and jump into whichever menu we want by going over to the left and highlighting them in yellow. We're going to start with the photo shooting menu. And the first option is just to reset that menu to factory defaults. We don't want to do that. It's all set up. Second menu is to create storage folders named how you want. You can do some control over what storage folders are created on your memory cards. You can change the name of your files. You can jump in and call it HPH, for my initials, Hudson, Pike Henry, or you can just leave it at the default like I have it. You can tell it how you want the memory card in slot 2 to function. I use it as overflow for photography so that if I run out of room on the main card, it'll start putting photos on the second card. And then I'll show you in the video setup menu how we can set up the second card to capture video. Now, some people want to do backup where it shoots to both cards. Some want to shoot RAW and JPEG. I just shoot in RAW. My settings will all be designed around RAW. Image area, you could choose whether you want full frame, DX crop, that's APS-C, or a square crop. You're cropping in on the sensor, capturing less pixels that way. I just shoot FX most of the time. This tone mode is all about sort of the future of high dynamic range video monitors. And I think that's still sort of getting the cart a little before the horse. I don't think that technology is settled. Not that many people have hyperlog gamut capable video monitors. I keep my still photography to standard dynamic range. If you want to play around with hyperlog gamut, great. I'm sticking with standard dynamic range for the foreseeable future. We'll see where the technology goes. Image quality, like I said, I like RAW. This is where you could go to shoot RAW plus JPEG or different JPEG sizes. That grays out image size settings because we're shooting RAW. I'm not shooting smaller, size JPEGs. I'm just shooting RAW. What the sensor sees gets recorded. And I'd really urge you, if you're a JPEG shooter, to consider at least shooting RAW plus JPEG, because down the road, it's going to give you more latitude. You get that amazing image that you wish just had a little bit more highlight detail or shadow detail. You can pull that in RAW. Or the white balance was a little bit off. You can change that in post in RAW. It just gives you more flexibility. And as the RAW editing software gets better and better, RAW files let you edit them better and better. ISO sensitivity settings, there's a dedicated button that you can go into to change ISO. You hold down that button near the shutter button and roll the back command dial, the main command dial, to change ISO, and the front command dial, a click turns it to auto, a click turns auto off. But this lets you go in and do some more tweaking. Like you can say the maximum ISO sensitivity for auto ISO. And in this camera, its sensor's so good in low light, so little noise, I set that to 20,000. Maximum sensitivity of flash, I leave the same. I let it choose the shutter speeds for determining what ISO should be. You know, it's going to manipulate the ISO based on what focal length lens you have and what the shutter speed should be for that. If you want to tweak with that, you can do it. And I'll point out that whenever there's a question mark on a setting, you can jump up and touch the little question mark on the LCD, and it will let you tweak and change those settings, or it'll give you an explanation if you're confused about something. White balance. Again, this is something I put in the eye menu, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with an eye menu. So I jump back out here. You're looking at the back of my lens cap, but if I push the eye menu, this is a customizable group of things that you can jump into either in the touch screen, like white balance, or by pushing the I button and moving the D-pad around if you're looking through the viewfinder. And I put handy things in there. So here we are in the menu. It's sort of the same options as you get in the I menu, which I think is much quicker than going into the menus. Set picture control. That's, you know, what style JPEG would you be creating if you're shooting a JPEG? Now, Nikon's awesome in that it appends the picture control profile to the raw file. And if you're using a good quality editor, like I love Adobe Lightroom Classic, you can go into Lightroom Classic settings under the preset settings and say read camera profile. And then whatever profile you choose in here, your raw file will come in looking just like in your processing software. You don't have to do anything to that raw file to get it looking like it would if it were a JPEG out of the Nikon, but you have infinite ability to tweak it later. So when I shoot monochrome, it comes into Lightroom looking like a black and white, like a monochrome. And my favorite picture control settings are neutral and monochrome. Monochrome for black and white, neutral for color. And the reason I like neutral for color is that when I look at the red, green, and blue histogram to determine whether my exposure is right, it's based off that more neutral JPEG that's created to preview on the back of the camera. It still looks like a good JPEG, but I get to see whether or not I've really captured the highlights and the shadows. If you choose something like Vivid, it's going to crunch the contrast, really boost contrast, and you'll see whites going out of gamut and blacks going off into the blocked out shadows. You get the most accurate histogram because it's based on the JPEG rendered with the picture control settings off of neutral. Managed picture control lets you create your own profiles. If you want to go in and dig into that, you can. Set the hyperlog gamut picture controls. Remember, we're using standard definition. That's the whole thing for that HDR monitor thing. Color space, you can choose sRGB or Adobe. It doesn't matter for RAW. RAW files don't have a color space. The RAW processor, when it demosaics that raw data, assigns its base color space. So I set Adobe RGB in case I ever shoot a JPEG. I'd like to have it in a wider color gamut to be able to edit that JPEG. Active delighting. This is the thing that makes shadows a little bit boosted in your JPEG images. It has no effect on RAW files. However, it will affect the way the camera meters to create that preview JPEG for the RAW file. The preview JPEG on the back of the LCD will look like it's got boosted shadows, either, you know, low, medium, or low, normal, high, extra high, automatic. I leave that turned off because it will affect the metering for the RAW file, and I don't want it to, it's not going to affect the RAW file, so I leave it turned off. Long exposure noise reduction. This one throws a lot of people for the loop. It's not exactly what you think it is. This is not reducing high ISO noise. This is looking for dead pixels when the sensor's active for longer than normal. So when you're working at more than a second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, 30 seconds, sometimes the sensor, given certain environmental conditions and what's going on at this moment with the sensor, how long the camera's been running, can have all kinds of little dead pixels pop up that look like speckles and sparks in different colors on your image. So what the camera does to eliminate that is it'll run the long exposure, capturing the image that you want to capture, then close the shutter and run another exposure that should be perfectly black. And it compares the two and eliminates the dead pixels at that moment in time in those environmental conditions from your underlying RAW file. This is great to use in low lit tripod captures. All right, it takes twice as long for the exposure, but you'll have a lot less work in post. High ISO noise reduction, that's only going to be for JPEG. I leave that turned off. I'd rather do it in post-production on my RAW files. If you're shooting JPEG, I play around with the different settings. There's low, normal, and high. Vignette control, this does apply to RAW files and to JPEGs. It just sort of tries to reduce the effects of vignetting with certain lenses that create a little bit of a darkened edge. Diffraction compensation, the same thing. It's kind of try to mitigate some of the loss of sharpness shooting at really, really narrow apertures. Auto distortion control, lenses that throw a lot of pincushion or barrel distortion, it'll work to try to straighten up some of that distortion, and it works both on RAW and JPEGs. Skin softening, this is a thing portrait photographers do. It'll recognize a human subject and just sort of smooth the skin, just kind of smooth it out a little bit. That's a JPEG only setting. I shoot RAW, so it's not very helpful to me. Portrait impression balance is another thing portrait photographers can use to just be able to easily adjust the tint and the brightness of their portrait subjects. Photo flicker reduction. This is when you're working in lighting situations where it looks like the lights are flickering. The camera will automatically look for the best moment to capture when the lights are not flickering, but it can affect your ability to capture the instant right when you want. It might give you a little lag, a little delay when you hit the shutter as it searches for that perfect millisecond to be in between the flicker and the lights. High flicker frequency or high frequency flicker reduction. That's a thing for some of the modern LED lights that look like they've got banding as you're looking at the image. You'll see it. You'll know if you see it. You can turn this on and sort of adjust that out with your shutter speed. It's a pretty cool feature. I rarely use it, but if you need it, it's good to have it there. Metering, again, I put this in the I menu, but you can choose between matrix and center weighted and spot metering. Flash control, this is where you would go if you're using an on-camera or off-camera flash system to control all your settings, whether you're in manual, whether you're in TTL, what type of mode you're in. Mode is right here. I tend to leave it in rear curtain shutter sync. You can also use fill, or I rarely use red eye, or just turn it off if you have a flash on the camera. If I'm using TTL, if Nikon's determining the flash exposure, I generally tell Nikon to turn it way down, either -1 1/3 stop, or as this -1 2/3 stops. Release mode, there's a dedicated button, but I applaud Nikon for adding this to the photo shooting menu in the newer cameras. That enables you to store it in the user modes on the dial. It didn't used to be in any of the menus, and therefore you might set up a user mode to go into high speed to go into like wildlife shooting, things like that, like we're going to do in the second video in this series where we set up the U3 for sports, action, and wildlife. Having this release mode in the menu enables me to have that user mode also contain the release mode to flip from single frame to high speed continuous. So you can go in here and you can change your different release modes, from low continuous to single frame to high speed continuous. We can be in single frame here. You can also do that by just pressing the button and using the command dials. Focusing mode, whether you're in manual focus, autofocus continuous where it keeps tracking subjects, autofocus single servo where it locks focus on still subjects, and autofocus modes with automatic autofocus mode switching where the camera tries to determine that for you. I tend to bounce between AFS, AFC, and manual focus. Autofocus area mode. This is all the different modes that you can use. How is the camera determining what to focus on? You've got auto area where the camera just picks the subject for you and tracks it. 3D tracking where you say, this is my subject. And these are smart modes. Wide area are all different size smart modes where it looks for a subject within the area that you've set, whether large, small, or custom. Dynamic area, these are old school kind of dumb autofocus points that are not looking for subjects, but will kind of hand off the moving subject in between the different focus points around the chosen focus point. And then the more landscape, still life focus, single point, and pinpoint autofocus. Pinpoint autofocus is only available in AFS, that single servo mode. Autofocus manual focus subject detection options. This is where you choose whether you want the camera to be looking for people specifically, or animals, or birds, or vehicles, or airplanes, or automatically be choosing one of those. And it will look in this order. It will first look for people, then animals, then birds, then vehicles, and airplanes. Or there are certain situations where you want to turn that off. And a situation I would think about that is when, say, you've got a butterfly that has a false eye on its wing. The subject detection will snap to that wing, and you'll have a really hard time in one of these auto subject detection modes getting the butterfly's face, its little head in focus. So if you turn subject detection off and put your 3D tracking point on its head and lock it, it'll lock that head all over the frame and not be fooled by the eye. It's a really cool thing to be able to do. Manual focus subject detection area. This is super cool. It came with the ZF and Nikon's been including it in every camera since. This is turned off by default. It looks like this, but I would choose one of these modes. And what it does is it looks for your choice of selected type of subject, either in a wide area, large or small frame, or in auto area. And when it sees it, it'll draw a box, say around a person's eye. And then we'll program this camera's controls so that the OK button zooms into 100% and tracks that eye while you're manually focusing it to perfection. There's another setting we'll come along to later where we half press the shutter speed to cancel that zoom, and then you can compose and shoot. It just makes working with manual focus lenses like cheating. It's amazing. I love it. I never use focus peaking. I use this. I find my subject, the camera draws a box, I hit OK, zoom, it zooms in on that subject, I focus it to perfection, hit the shutter halfway and compose and shoot. Vibration reduction. This is that in-body image stabilization. I never turn it off. There's a couple of different modes though. There's normal and there's sport. In the old days, you had to turn off vibration reduction when working on a tripod, or it would actually induce some blur in your image while it tried to stabilize the camera when it was still. Camera's smarter than that now. I never turn this off. Working on the tripod, doesn't matter. I just leave it turned on. But people get confused about sport and normal. They would think sport is more aggressive vibration reduction, but it's actually the opposite. Normal is a very aggressive vibration reduction, and sometimes as you're holding the shutter down, halfway down, and then firing a frame with vibration reduction active, you'll actually notice that there's kind of a jump between where the subject was as you fired the frame and where it is when it lets go. It's because it's really trying to lock and stay very, very still on the subject. If you go into sport mode, you can sometimes interfere with you tracking a moving subject, that really aggressive in-body image stabilization. So sport mode is a slightly less aggressive in-body image stabilization that lets you keep tracking subjects without sort of locking them and having them move. It makes it easier to say pan and track a moving subject. Try it out, you'll see what I mean. Link vibration reduction to focus point. This was first released in the ZF. This camera really is a lot. It's the same sensor as the ZF with just a more modern control set. And what this does is it lets you link the vibration reduction to the focus point you're using on your subject. So it makes sure that it maximizes vibration reduction in the area of the sensor where your subject is being recorded. Pretty darned amazing. It's the only cameras I know of to do that are the latest Nikon Z cameras. Auto bracketing. This is another one that I put in the eye menu. This lets you, in high dynamic range circumstances, really high contrast scenes, bright shadows, bright highlights, dark shadows, capture multiple exposures to blend in post-production to get all of that tonality in one high dynamic range image. So you can turn it on and off here. You can also turn it on and off in the eye menu the way I set it up. You can choose how you want to be bracketing. I tend to use auto exposure bracketing. And then how many frames and how many stops apart. And I tend to usually shoot 3 frames, 3 stops apart. These cameras, you've got to remember, capture a wide amount of dynamic range, like 12, 13 stops down in the lower ISO. And if you were to shift it by a single stop, you're barely moving that realm. You want to go by 3 stops to capture the most. And you don't need a dozen frames a single stop apart. It's barely changing. So 3 frames, 3 stops apart. That's been my mode for a long time. Multiple exposures, another really cool thing that we can do where we overlay one image atop another image atop another image, and you can actually see the effects. There's a lot of different settings in here. It's something fun to play with. There's different overlay modes, and you can save the individual photos. It's pretty neat. HDR overlay, that's another way to capture high contrast scenes into a single frame where the camera does the HDR processing. I would not do that. I really think that you're far better off using post-production software like Lightroom Classic or On1 Photo Raw to do that HDR processing with you controlling the end result. Interval timer shooting. I'm going to dive into this really quick. It's super cool how it works. This is how I capture time lapse, a whole sequence of images. And you're essentially just telling the camera, I want you to fire a frame every so often. So you'd set up your exposure. I'd usually use manual mode with a lockdown ISO, so there's no changes. You can choose a start time. You can tell it to start right now. You can set what the interval between each frame is. You got to make sure there's enough time to capture, say you had a 1 second shutter speed, a 2 second interval is perfect. This is 2 seconds. You can change that by just going in here and changing the parameters. You can choose how many shots are being captured. In this case, 240 frames. If you create a video time lapse at 24 frames per second, which is sort of my preferred frames per second for a cinematic look, 240 frames would equal 10 seconds of video. Exposure smoothing, that's only if you're using an automatic mode like aperture priority or shutter priority. It'll try to make no drastic exposure changes, or auto ISO. Electronic shutter, that just keeps everything silent, and you can tell it that you want a little bit of a shutter sound or not. Sometimes having a little shutter sound happening, snick, 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 will keep somebody from walking in front of your camera or bumping it if you're in a group shooting situation. Sometimes I leave that on, sometimes I have it perfectly silent. Interval priority, that's if you're working with automatic modes. You want to lock your interval in. Because I'm shooting manual, I don't worry about that. Focus before each shot, that's something I always want to have turned off. I don't want the focus shifting around in my time lapse. And then under options, there's a whole bunch of cool things. You could do bracketing, which I don't do, but time lapse video is really, really cool. You can tell it, I want to create a video in camera just to preview what my time lapse looks like. I'd rather do the actual time-lapse edit in post-production where I can process those raw files and get them looking exactly like I want, and do all the processing myself in Photoshop and Lightroom, or Lightroom time-lapse from Gunther, amazing software. But the camera will create a little preview file, and I usually use 8-bit H.265. I have it be 24 frames per second at 4K. 4K is 3840 by 2160. And I have it put the destination on card slot 2. Like I said, I like my video files to be on the second card slot and my photo files on the first card slot. So that's really cool. You can also tell it create a new folder that only the interval shooting images go into. And that way you can tell the first image in your time-lapse sequence from the test shots that you did, getting your exposure right leading up to it. They're all going to be in one folder. You can import them, color code them differently, stack them in your post-processing software. Pretty cool stuff. Time-lapse video, I don't do in-camera time-lapse. The difference between shooting physical frames of raw files to put into time-lapse versus shooting time-lapse video is so much editability. If you're shooting raw files, you can tweak them just like a raw photograph and turn that beauty into a time-lapse video. It's something you can never do with a video created in camera. A video in the camera is so compressed, way compressed beyond a JPEG, that there's very little latitude to edit it in post-production. Focus shift shooting, there's some cool stuff in here. This is something to look up and check out. This is all about doing focus stacking automatically in the camera. You set your focus on the closest subject in autofocus mode, and it will run through and incrementally shoot a whole sequence of shots from that close focus to infinity. You can limit how many shots so it doesn't go all the way to infinity. You can set up different step widths. If you're doing macro work, you want to come down into this realm. If you're doing landscape work, I generally set it at 8 or 9 to just capture a few frames. So it's really, really cool. Something to look into beyond the scope of the setup guide. Pixel shift shooting, it's another one where you set up on a tripod, you activate pixel shift shooting, and this camera will take a series of images, 4 or 16 images, and blend those into up to 96 megapixel file by sort of shifting the sensor around. But I've done some looking at this. I did some work with this and compared it to using super resolution with a single sharp frame in Lightroom Classic. And I found that super resolution tended to do a better job. And it's a lot easier and a lot more foolproof to work with a single file and capture one single great file in post. This has all kinds of problems if your subjects are moving like clouds or water in the scene, or plants are blowing or anything like that. Capturing one good sharp landscape frame and then putting it through super resolution in post gives you a lot more latitude, and I actually think the results are a little bit better. You can check out the video that I'm talking about right here. I'll link it right here so that you can check that out. All right, So actually, I think it's linked over here. But that concludes our photo shooting menu. All right, the video recording menu. I'm going to run much faster through this. There's a lot of redundancy with the photo shooting menu, and I think most of you are probably still photographers. Again, you've got to reset to factory defaults option at the top. You can change the name of the storage folder. You can change the names of the files. You can tell it where you want the video files to be stored. Again, as I said, I shoot video to card 2, stills to card 1, and overflow stills to card 2. The video file type, I like 10-bit H.265. You know, there are a lot of choices in here. There's full raw video. There's a whole bunch of different options, but I like the 10-bit video. It's much more editable in post. If you don't want to do any editing in post, I would compare the 10-bit and the 8-bit. The thing that the 10-bit video gives you is a little bit more dynamic range, a little bit more highlight and shadow detail at the same time. Frame size, frame rate. I like shooting 4K video at 24 frames per second. If my subjects are moving a little faster, I might consider shooting at 60 frames a second for just smooth action subjects. I'll still have it play back at 24 frames a second. You can also slow that down a little bit. If you really want slow motion, with this camera, you need to drop down to 1080p from 4K, and you can shoot it up to 5 times slow motion at 120 frames a second. Image area, so same thing. You can shoot in DX or full frame, and I like to have that DX crop alert turned on, both for stills and for photos. That gives you a little blinking light, hey, you're not shooting the full frame sensor. That's a nice thing to just remind you. ISO sensitivity settings, just like the photography ISO. For auto ISO, you can set a maximum sensitivity, and I set it a little more for video, 25,600. You can turn auto ISO on and off and set your base sensitivity. Again, that's all going to be accessible via the ISO button on your camera while you're out shooting. White balance, we can put this in the I menu. This is more important in video because it's really baked in. You can't change it in post like you can a RAW file. I do find often that auto ISO works, but I always want to check in and make sure it's right because, again, you're really not going to be able to tweak it in post the same way. Picture control, again, really important. This is going to be baked in. You know, you can't change it like you can with a RAW file. So, and again, I like to shoot neutral. It's really editable in post. Manage picture control. You can create your own profiles. Hyperlog gamut, that's only if you were shooting in hyperlog gamut. I don't tend to shoot hyperlog gamut. Active D lighting, that gets a little bit more important from video because unlike RAW files, it is going to be put in place. And I tend to like just the normal active D lighting. It boosts shadow detail a little bit in my videos. High ISO noise reduction, I leave that set at normal. It is going to be applied in the video. Vignette control, just like stills. Diffraction compensation, just like stills. I leave those turned on and normal. Auto distortion control adds a little bit less distortion. Skin softening, that's something you might explore if you're doing close-ups of people. Might make their skin look a little bit nicer in the video. It will be applied. Portrait impression balance is just like photos. It'll let you adjust the tint and the brightness of your portrait subject a little bit. Video flicker reduction, this is something I definitely leave on auto all the time. It just reduces flicker in the video. That's particularly important with lower quality LED lights. I'm lit right now by really high quality LED lights that have almost no flicker at all. But you can get into situations where it's really problematic in video, and so leaving that at auto is great. Again, if you see banding moving through your video, you can turn on that high frequency flicker reduction and adjust it out with shutter speed. Metering, again, you can choose center weighted, highlight, matrix. I generally just run in matrix. Autofocus mode, you get a new autofocus mode called AFF, which is full-time autofocus. And if you set subject detection, it'll lock a subject and just keep focusing it no matter what happens. That's the case with me. Right now, I'm shooting with the Z52 and AFF with auto area autofocus and human subject detection. So it sees my face, it sees my eyes, and it's just keeping me in focus all the time automatically without anyone touching the camera at all. It's pretty cool. Autofocus area mode, you know, auto area works great. You also have subject tracking autofocus, which is a legacy mode from the old original Z6, Z7, Z62, Z72, Z50, and you tap a section on the screen and it will lock that as your subject and track it around and continue to focus on it. You also get the smart wide area and single points. Autofocus, manual focus, subject detection options, just like in stills. This is an awesome thing for manual focus lenses. It'll let you see a subject. You can zoom in if you want, but you can also just manually focus till the box around your subject goes green. It'll automatically identify the subjects that you have set and give you a notification that they're sharp. And you can also zoom in on them with the touch of the OK button, and touch again takes it back off. Product review mode, that's something new. I believe it came with the Z52 first of all, and it's mainly for people like me that are doing product reviews and they want to hold something up to the camera, and instead of the camera jumping to focus on the subject, the person, it recognizes, ooh, the thing closest to me being held up to me is really the subject. So it'll lock in on, say, the lens that I'm showing the camera. It can be handy, say you're wanting to focus the close-up world or take a video of something that's not normally identifiable as a subject that's up close to the camera. Keeps it from jumping off that, looking for some other subject that it thinks is more important. Manual focus subject detection area. Again, this is that, you can do wide area, small area, or auto area. I think I actually thought we were talking about that when we were just in, nope, that's right, subject detection. This is your subject detection we were in earlier, where you can do auto, people, animals, vehicles, airplanes, like I talked about in the stills, in the shooting menu. This is where you choose what manual focus subject detection area. So when you're manually focusing, you can tell it, I want to be looking for subjects in a wide area, a small area, or the whole frame. That's off by default. I would turn it on. Video self-timer, that just lets it count down and give you a little time to get in front of the camera before it starts recording, if you were doing selfie stuff. Vibration reduction, again, you could turn it off. There's also a sport, normal, just like in photography settings. Then you get electronic vibration reduction because you're shooting video and you're not necessarily shooting the entire sensor. It'll sort of do some vibration reduction by adjusting what part of the sensor, which pixels are recording. That's how GoPro does vibration reduction. It's kind of amazing what's possible with software these days. That's something you can turn on if you need even more vibration reduction. Say you're hand holding some really long lens shooting some sporting event or something. Microphone sensitivity. If you're using external mics and really doing a production where sound matters to you, like I'm doing right now, I would not leave the microphone set in automatic. I would go into manual and set my levels. But if you're just shooting some stuff for fun and you're using the camera's built-in microphones, the auto levels work pretty well. There's different ways to adjust the microphone, for human voices, to drown out low rumbly noises, to drown out wind, to create power for microphones that need power to be working. Those are all available right here. You can also listen to what the audio sounds like as you're recording it. If you're shooting and you're recording audio, you can put headphones on so that you actually hear what the video is recording, and you can adjust the headphone volume. I put those kinds of adjustments in the video menu. We'll talk about that when we get to controls and customizing controls. The rest of the stuff is kind of advanced stuff, like time code is for when you're working with multiple cameras and you want to establish a time code to be able to easily edit all those different camera clips together. More film production stuff. External mic recording, that for HDMI, or external recording controls for HDMI recorders. That's if you're working with external recorders, so you can control turning the camera on and off. High-res zoom, that's something that's it's a cool feature in the higher megapixel cameras when you're shooting 4K off of an 8K sensor that actually samples the whole 8K sensor, down resos it to 4K, and lets you zoom in while maintaining a 4K resolution. You can zoom in 2 times, zoom back 2 times really smoothly, and you can adjust what speed the zoom is and which control buttons you use to do that virtual zooming. This will only let you do that at 1080p. It's still a cool feature, but it's not available in 4K. That's why it's grayed out right now. And that concludes the video recording menu. So next we're going to jump in and talk about the custom settings. All right, so these menus are pretty deep and they're divided into different sections. We'll try to move fast, but you've got your A section for focus options, B section for metering, and you can run down through these and arrow over to the right and jump start your way right to where you want to get. Going into autofocus, there's these priority selections for AFC and AFS. AFC is when it's continuously autofocusing on moving subjects. AFS is when it's single servo locked on subjects. And you can choose what your priority is. So for AFC, I'd rather have it be release, which means I want to choose that precise moment during the action that's like capturing the instant that matters. So the shutter is what's most important when I push it. Whereas autofocus single servo, when I'm doing still lifes and landscapes, it's about having absolutely perfect focus before the camera shoots. So in that case, focus is more important to me than release. Focus tracking with lock on. This is about when you're tracking a subject and it goes behind a tree and then comes out the other side. How long does the camera continue to try to track that subject that went out of sight to see if it comes back into the frame before looking for another subject? I find the default of 3 works great, but you can make it faster or you can make it slower. Focus points used. You can choose to only use half the focus points if you feel like there's too many. I tend to like to use all the focus points. Store points by orientation. This is kind of a cool one. So when you're using the camera vertically, you might move the focus point down to the bottom left to capture something coming into the scene. And then when you turn it horizontally, you'd like the focus point still to be at the bottom left. So when you switch, the camera will remember where to put that focus point. But there's a little trick that snares people in this setting. When you arrow over to the right, it can be off, or it can be focus point, which is where I like to have it, or it can be focus point and AF area mode. Invariably, I'm in a workshop and somebody says, every time I turn my camera vertical, it goes from 3D to wide area. Well, I know right where to go. It's in this setting. You got to turn that off. If you're shooting vertically and you switch into a different area mode, and then you pick up your camera later and you're shooting horizontally and you flip to vertical and all of a sudden it goes to a different area mode, you're like, what is happening? Well, I'm sure there's some use case for it, but in general, I just choose focus point. You don't, I just accidentally did that wrong. You want to go up here and select focus point. That's all you want. AF activation off. This is for back button focusing. And, I know many people are used to having the shutter button be the focusing button, but they're 2 different purposes, tripping the shutter and focusing. And you've got this nice big button right where your thumb rests to autofocus. And it can be so handy. You're in autofocus continuous, tracking a moving subject. You lock focus, the subject's not moving. You can recompose, shoot all you want to shoot without affecting that locked focus. You don't have to keep your point on the subject. There's times when I'm out in the landscape and I want to capture a frame focused on the foreground and a frame focused on the background. I'll focus on the close foreground, hit the autofocus button, get it locked, move my focus point out over the distant mountains, and hit the shutter, hit the focus, hit the shutter, and get the image so that I can blend those in post and have everything in focus. It just gives you more control. You don't always want to focus when you shoot the picture, and you won't find any pro photographers using shutter button focus. This is where you turn that off and say, I only want to focus with the AF on button. We'll modify that a little bit for sports action and wildlife in the next video where I talk about how to set up the user 3 mode. Focus point persistence. This is a cool one. And again, we'll talk about this one when we go into sports action and wildlife on the user 3 in the next video, part 2 of this. And this is where if you're in one autofocus area mode, let's say wide area, and you've captured a bird in flight, you've locked that subject, and then you program another button to be AF on plus a different area mode like 3D that tracks a subject frame wide. This focus point persistence means that it'll hold on to the point captured in one auto area mode and hand it off to a point captured in another autofocus area mode. So this is key to the hybrid handoff for sports action and wildlife that we'll talk about in a little bit, or in the next video. Limit autofocus area mode selection. I turn off all the dynamic areas so that when I'm flipping through a list, I don't even see them. They're for moving subjects, but they're old autofocus area points that don't have subject detection built in, and subject detection is ground-shakingly great. If I don't want to be using subject detection, I would rather turn subject detection off and use 3D tracking. I also turn off the custom wide area modes because I tend to be happy with just wide area, large and small. You can leave these on to your, to try them all out, but I've over trial and error decided I don't need any of those modes. Focus point wraparound. I leave this turned off. This is where when you're moving the focus point across the screen and you go off the right side, it pops up on the left side of the screen, sort of like Pac-Man going through the tunnel in the old video game. Personally, I find that it just it confuses me in my process. I'd rather have it bump up against the edge and take it back where I want than have it pop up on the other side and have to take it the other way. So that's just how it works better for me. Focus point display. This is where you can customize the way that your focus point looks. Make sure that it appears in manual focus mode, which is important for confirming focus. You get that green square that you can change the width of the focus point, the color of the focus point, all kinds of things that people tend to love. Colorblind people, people with a little vision impairment. Built-in autofocus assist illuminator. That's that big green light that lights up on the front. That thing tends to bug me. I find it more annoying than useful in some rare circumstance, like photographing an event with people in a darkened room. Maybe I turn it back on to improve autofocus performance, but the need for it is so rare and the annoyance of it is so great in a group of photographers in a low lit landscape that I leave it turned off. Focus peaking. I personally really don't like focus peaking when I'm manually focusing. It makes everything in the image look shimmery and digital and sort of takes me out of the image making mindset. It bothers me. I don't love it, but a lot of people use it. It just shows you what part of the scene is in focus. I would rather zoom to focus, putting my focus point where I want, manually focus to perfection, pop back out, shoot. That's just me. If you want to use it, this is where you go in and adjust its color, its intensity, and whether it's turned on or off. Focus point selection speed. How fast do the focus points move around when you're running the joystick or the D-pad? I usually leave that at normal, but you have low or high speed settings too. Manual focus ring in autofocus mode. Does it make a difference when you turn this digital input device called a focus ring on the modern lenses while you're in autofocus mode? I like to have it. There are times where a lens is kind of looking in the wrong direction and I can manually focus rack it back out closer to where I want the subject, and then it grabs the autofocus easier by creating contrast lines on the sensor. It's really looking at the sensor, and if things are too blurred with a wide aperture lens, sometimes it has to hunt and seek all over the range of the lens to get that contrast line to find your subject. Sometimes you can help that with the manual focus even when you're autofocusing. ISO sensitivity step values, you can choose a full stop or a third of a stop. So this is for moving around and selecting the in-between settings and exposure settings. I like to have it fine. I like 1/3 of a stop. Same thing for exposure control. Just in general, I want the steps to be a third of a stop, not a full stop or a half stop. You can choose differently if you'd like. Easy exposure compensation. This is just about not having to press the button to do exposure compensation and move the wheel at the same time. I like pushing the button, doesn't bother me. Matrix metering, and anytime, like I said, if you've got a question about a setting, you can just push that question mark and see it says without using the exposure compensation button. It'll tell you about what that means. You just touch that on the touch screen. Matrix metering face detection. This is whether or not the camera notices human faces in the scene and takes them into a little bit more account than the rest of the scene when doing metering. And in general, I really like this. I love to photograph people and I want the people well exposed so they can count for a little bit more in the metering decisions that the camera makes. And I find I like the way that it does that. So I leave that turned on. You can customize the center weighted metering. You can have it be small, average, standard. I just choose standard. I almost never use center weighted metering. I think it's kind of a legacy metering mode. You can fine tune the camera's exposure meter. If you find it feels like it's overexposing things or underexposing things, you can tweak it. I tend to trust Nikon's meter implicitly. It does a great job. I don't mess with that. Shutter release button. Does the shutter release button lock exposure? So just like having it focus, you can also have it lock exposure. I don't want that. No way, no how. I want to have it be able to recompose and still be, doing its metering for the scene as I'm going to shoot it. You can turn that on or off though. The self timer. This is where you go in and adjust, say you're going to do a group selfie. How many seconds do you have to get in with the group? How many shots do you want to take? How long do you want it between shots? Power off delay. This is settings for saving your battery. I have it tweaked right now. Instead of 30 seconds for menus and 30 seconds for standby timer, I have 5 minutes just because I'm showing you what's going on in the camera right now, and I don't want it timing out constantly. But it's good to know where this is. You can adjust it. Continuous low speed shooting, the speed the continuous low speed is. You can adjust this with the drive button. You hold down the drive button and the back dial adjusts the mode. You know, am I in high speed continuous, high speed extended? Am I in low speed? And then the front subcommand dial chooses how many frames per second low speed equals. All right, so that's nice to know. Easy peasy right there. You know, I can also just go back to single frame, boom, and timer, all that's right there. But it's also right here. Maximum shots per burst. I put it at the maximum, 200, as many as I can. Pre-release capture option. So this is that crazy mode that they've included in all the cameras since the Z9, where you can actually hold down the shutter button. If you're in this high-speed JPEG mode, let me show you. If you're in beyond high-speed extended, you go into the C15, C30, either of those modes. You can set this right here so that if you go into either of those modes and you half hold the shutter down, it will be continuously capturing a series of frames at the speed you've selected, C15, C30, 15 frames per second or 30 frames per second, and writing over them. So right now, I have the pre-release burst set for half a second. That means that when I actually press the shutter, it'll back up and save a half a second's worth of images from before I pressed the shutter. It's been recording them and then just writing over the top. And it will continue to record for a second after I release the shutter button. All right. So, and then, you know, it just goes back. As long as you're half pressing the shutter, it's recording a loop of images, but it's for that baseball hitting the bat, for the snake's tongue coming out of its mouth. It makes it easier to capture these things that by the time you press the button, it's over. But now you can be holding the button down and capture everything from just before you press the button. It's pretty cool. Sync release mode options. This is for when you're working with multiple cameras and controlling them all from one. I won't go into that. Exposure delay mode. This is clutch. This is something that I use all the time in low lit scenes. You know, in between, say, a 20th of a second and 10 seconds. You get beyond 10 seconds, there's not much effect on the camera from pressing the shutter button and having a little bit of shake. But in that in-between area, you know, shorter duration, long exposures, pressing the camera can create shake that blurs your image. And exposure delay mode lets you say, hey, after I press the button, wait 0.2 of a second, or a half a second, or 1 second, or 2 seconds before you actually create the exposure. This is something that I put in the iMenu, and it's something I use all the time instead of a cable release. Just press and take your hand away, ka-chink, it takes the frame. Super, super handy. Shutter type, whether it's electronic or mechanical, I usually leave it at auto. The camera makes great decisions about that. Extended shutter speeds. This is off by default. I don't understand why. Extended shutter speeds allow you to program in shutter speeds all the way to 900 seconds in camera. So you don't have to use some timed cable release or something. You can actually dial in 900 seconds. The camera won't meter beyond 30 seconds, but you can figure out what the metering is like at 30 seconds and then just count exposure stops and backwards calculate it. Limit selectable image area. I tend to always work in FX or DX. If you're a person who works in 16:9 or 1:1, you can do that. I turn those off because I never tend to use them. File sequence number just continues counting files. It's like, how is it numbering the images? And if it's on, it continues from the last number used. If it's off, it starts from the highest number in the current folder. All right, so I just keep it sequentially recording. This is one that messes people up. View mode, photo live view. You want the view camera effects, the effect of your camera settings. I see a lot of people saying, well, my image looks great, but then when I'm capturing images, they look dark or they look completely overexposed. Well, that's where if you choose adjust for ease of viewing, which sounds like a great idea, but what it means is that what you're looking at in the viewfinder and on the back LCD is going to look great no matter if you have horrible settings. You want to see what the effects of your settings are live in the viewfinder and live on the back LCD. So that's important. Show effects of settings only when flash is not used, or always. You know, you can make the choice if you're a flash photographer. Starlight view. This just amplifies the light signal. It's for when you're working on the tripod at night, and it's amazing in low lit situations. I can see the horizon line and details in the landscape when shooting a Milky Way on a moonless night. Amazing. And the bright stars all scattered out in the sky. and you can autofocus on those stars. It's relatively incredible. Warm display colors, when you turn this on, there are several modes, and the minute you go into them, as you can see, we go red light. One of the modes has color for the playback, but red light for everything else. The other mode is red light for everything. I think mode 1 is red light everything. Mode 2 is red light for the image. You play around with it, you'll see, but it's wonderful for not blowing your night vision at night. These screens are so bright at night. Red light mode solves that. It's incredible for star shooting. I don't think there's any better camera than these Nikons for star shooting, and I don't think there's any better Nikon cameras than the Z5 II and the ZF with their really high dynamic range, low noise sensors for that kind of work. View all in continuous mode, I leave that turned on. That just lets you see every frame as you're capturing high-speed continuous shots. Release timing indicator. This is what, when you're in electronic shutter, there's no sounds, there's no indication, there's no shutter moving up and down in front of your view. So I like mode B, where these little lines flash around the frame when you're capturing images in that mode. Image frame, I like to see the image frame. You can turn it off or on. Grid type, when you have the grid displayed in the display, I like it to be a 3x3 rule of third grid. There's several other choices in here. I like 3x3. Virtual horizon, there's the old-fashioned DSLR style or the newfound, much nicer sort of pilot style. I like type A. Half press to cancel manual focus zoom. This is what I was talking about in conjunction with manual focus subject detection. Your camera sees an eye while you're manually focusing, draws a box. You hit the OK button, zoom to 100%. Perfect focus, half press the shutter to go back to fit view. It's wonderful. You want to turn that on. It's off by default. Custom monitor shooting display. So we can customize different displays. You can go off to the right of each of these different displays and customize what you want to see in them. So I could turn simple information on or off. So you customize each one, and here's how mine are set up. Nothing, just the rule of thirds grid, the horizon line, and the histogram. This is turned off, and all the information out there. And then you always have this display that's sort of like the eye menu in main settings. This is nice in the tripod sometimes. Custom viewfinder shooting displays. Very, very similar, same kind of setup. You can turn things on and off. I have one that's just nothing, one that's just that horizon line, grid, and histogram, plus simple exposure information since it doesn't overlap the image. One that has everything. Flash sync speed. The fastest flash sync speed is 1/200th of a second. That's what I choose. Flash shutter speed, you can choose 1/60th or 1/30th. You don't want to blur motion too much. This is a lot of flash stuff. I'm going to move really quickly. Exposure compensation for flash, whether it's based on the entire frame or only on the background, that's going to be situational for flash photographers. Auto ISO flash sensitivity control, whether that's based on the subject and background or the subject only, whether or not your modeling flash is on or off. Auto bracketing in flash mode, how do you want it to work in flash mode? Is it just flash and speed or flash and speed and aperture, blah, 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 blah. Bracketing order. So this is in auto exposure bracketing, and this is one that throws people for a loop too. You've got normal, all right? And then you've got underexposed, on the meter, overexposed. Normal is where it shoots the frame that you've metered, and then it backs up and shoots one underexposed and one overexposed. It seems like it would make more sense to shoot the underexposed, the on the meter, the overexposed so that they're in order. But the problem is the way that Nikon implements that, you have to think through it and underexpose on the light meter for the first frame. So with me shooting 3 stops apart, I'd have to underexpose by 3 stops, then fire, fire, fire. It really winds up messing things up. Just go with the normal meter under over, and you'll have much less confusion. It's simpler. Flash burst priority, I tend to like prioritize precise flash control over frame advance rate. Okay, now here's where we customize the eye menu. We're getting into controls. This is a very important section. We're gonna jump in here and you can choose what goes in each of these cells by just simply touching any one of them. There's the white balance one. If I touch picture control, I can go through, and there's a tremendous list here. I think you get the idea. There's lots and lots and lots of different options, okay? I want to just go back because I want to keep it on picture control. But here's what I have set, all right? I'm going to go through all these top row first. White balance, metering, auto bracketing, interval timer shooting, which is my time-lapse mode, exposure delay mode, what focus mode I'm in, autofocus, manual focus, autofocus continuous, autofocus single servo. And then on the bottom row, I have set picture control, even though we already have a button for that. Sometimes I just want to do it from the iMenu. Vibration reduction, turning it on, off, or jumping to sport or normal. You can do that all from just tapping the iMenu. Long exposure noise reduction, whether that's on or off for long exposures. Focus shift shooting for capturing focus stacked images automatically in camera. Silent mode for when I want to go quiet and incognito, say at an event where the shutter sound is going to be annoying. And then autofocus area mode and subject selection. And this is my favorite way to select those because here I am in the iMenu. If I touch that, I can select auto area and automatic subject detection. I can just flip around really easily, really quickly. I can do that with the D-pad with my eye in the viewfinder without looking up as long as it's in the iMenu. All right, cool, cool. So going back into the menus, that's how we set up the iMenu. Custom controls for shooting. There are some things I changed from standard. I like the function 1 button, this top front button, which is highlighted in yellow in the display here, to be bracketing burst. That doesn't change bracketing, turn it on or off. That's in my iMenu. But what it means is that if I'm in single shot and suddenly I turn and I realize there's a lot of contrast in this scene, I'm really looking into the sun with some dark shadowed foreground, well, I can hit the iMenu, go into bracketing burst mode, and then if I hold this button down while I press the shutter, it fires all 3 frames. I don't have to go in and put it into continuous high speed or low speed mode where I hold down the button to fire all the frames the whole time. That's a whole nother set of moves. By just having this there, just pressing that button, I fire a bracketed burst. Function 2 is live information display off. So let's say I'm here and I touch function 2, boom. All I see is the scene without all of the distractions. I love that mode. I want to have that all the time just to see what I'm framing. I can see my settings, then turn them off and see what I'm framing. This is my vertical shooting we're not even using. The autofocus on is the same. I'm not changing any of these modes at all. The one that I do change is on the lens function button. So for some longer lenses, I like to put 3D autofocus area plus AF on. So what it does is essentially, no matter what mode I'm in, if I picked up a subject in autofocus and I'm looking at it through a long lens, when I press that lens function button, it turns on autofocus, so it's a second autofocus on button, and it also selects 3D tracking. So for that autofocus point persistence mode that we talked about earlier in the autofocus section, this is where that hybrid handoff comes in. So you're in wide area or you're in auto area. Let's say wide area, large or small. Or then you've picked up a subject in that box and you've locked it. You can press the lens function button and it becomes a 3D tracking point that's locked on the subject you've acquired and tracks it all over the frame. It lets you pick your subject in one mode and then lock it and follow it frame wide without keeping the box over it while you're photographing. It's really, really handy. Some lenses, the balance point puts that out in your lens function button 2. Some lenses only have a lens function button 1, so I put it on both of the lens function buttons. It's the thing I like to use the most. That's the only things I changed from stock on the control settings. I really don't care much for the function 1, function 2 initial control settings that Nikon puts in the camera. So during playback, I don't change these controls at all. I will have you note that the drive mode is image protection. That's something that I use a lot when I'm shooting in burst modes. I protect the keepers and delete the rest when I'm shooting lots and lots of sports action and wildlife. And that protect button by default is on the drive mode button. Touch function. So this is pretty cool. This lets you move the focus point around on the LCD. If you have the LCD facing out and you're looking through the viewfinder, you can enable touch to move the focus point around with your thumb by just dragging on the LCD screen while you're looking through the viewfinder. And the way you do that is you enable touch and then you say move focus point. You can also do all kinds of other things, but move focus point, and you can have the double tap either set an absolute focus position or center the focus point. I like it to center the focus point. So if I'm moving my thumb around, I can put the focus point where I want on the screen, in the LCD with my thumb on the LCD monitor. And if I double tap the LCD monitor, it centers the focus point even while I'm looking through the LCD viewfinder. So this is controlling focus points while you're looking through the viewfinder using the monitor. It's pretty cool. Go back again. Control lock, you can lock different controls so that they're locked out and you can't accidentally change them. I don't use that, but people made a case for them to be there. You can reverse the dial rotation if you're used to another camera brand where things are opposite. I'm used to Nikon, it makes sense to me. This one, a lot of people like. I don't personally. It means you can press a button and then that say exposure compensation or ISO and release the button and then change the settings while without holding the button down. I don't mind holding the ISO button down as I make the changes, but you can turn it on so that a single button press lets you then use the dials to make changes, and you'd have to press the button again to turn it off or press a different button. You can reverse the exposure meter indicators. Some camera brands are different. If you're used to it being different, you can change it. You can reverse the direction of focus in the focus ring. I'm pretty used to Nikon's direction. You can change how long it takes to focus, how much of the focus ring's range are you using. I tend to just leave it on Nikon's default nonlinear. You can set the control ring response. I don't use the control ring a ton, but you can change whether it's low or high response when you turn that ring for different functions like aperture control or exposure compensation. You can switch the focus control ring roles. If you feel like the control ring on a given lens that you have is in a better position to focus with, or vice versa. Power zoom button options. You can choose what buttons you use to do power zoom lenses. I don't use that a ton, but you can also control the speed under that setting. Full frame playback flicks. This is about, if you're in playback mode, you can set it so that flicking up and down do different things. They can change the ratings or protect an image or blah, blah, blah. Same thing with flick down, can do all those things too. And then there's the flick advanced direction, left to right, left to right. You can set it so sort of iPhone-like or old school computer-like. Prefer sub-selector center. I leave that turned on just so that it's kind of preferring the center and the sub-selector. Customize the eye. So now we're in video settings, and similarly, you can customize the eye menu for video. I don't change the video eye menu that much, just a little bit. I've got picture control, electronic vibration reduction, and again, this is the same thing where you tap it and you have a whole list of things to choose from for each pane here. Normal vibration reduction, white balance, the frame size and frame rate, custom controls. So I can go in and change the buttons for different things when I'm shooting video in case I suddenly want to change the controls. Product review mode, I use that a fair bit where I'm holding an object up to show people. So it's nice for the camera to not be trying to focus on me while I'm doing that. Microphone sensitivity, as I said, I'm using external mics all the time, and I tune my camera to have just the right microphone sensitivity to not blow the levels but sound good. I can choose the image area whether I'm in DX or FX, all from the eye menu. Change the active D lighting to get the shadow detail the way I want in my video. And then the same as shooting photos, I have the focus mode, autofocus, manual focus, continuous, autofocus, full time, all those modes, or what subject detection mode I happen to be in for video. Custom controls for video. I changed that up a bit. So my function 1 button actually switches eyes. My function 2 button does the live information display off, like I showed you before, where I touch that button and all the distractions on the screen go away. There's one other thing I change, which is the movie record button. No, I don't change the movie record button for this. Oh, you know what? I should go back and tell you one more thing I change in the still photography customized settings. I changed the lens function buttons a little bit. One is just autofocus on, the second button if I'm using a long lens, and I have auto exposure and autofocus lock on lens function 2. I really don't do a whole lot of changing in video. Those make sense to me in video, the way that it's programmed. But I will say that up in the stills controls, I forgot to mention one thing. Customize controls is that in the movie record button, I also changed that. And that is right here, depth of field preview. They just call it preview, but it's depth of field preview. And you would think in a mirrorless camera where you're seeing the effects of exposure, why would you have depth of field preview? Well, it's actually really critical because in the Nikon Z cameras, they do not stop down with electronic lenses beyond f5.6. And I think it's to preserve autofocus capability, but let's say you're in manual focus, you still can't see the effects of aperture on your image without pressing the depth of field preview button. It shows you right up to f5.6, but then f6.3, f8, f11, f16, you don't see those effects. You're stuck at f5.6 unless you press that button, and then you'll see whether things are sharp or not sharp in the frame at different apertures. So that's really important. All right, coming back in, we were at video. We've gone through the custom controls in video. Control lock, same thing. You can lock off different exposure controls, limit AF area mode selections. You can do the same thing there. Autofocus speed, how fast is it focusing? That's important for video, more important than it is for stills. Autofocus tracking sensitivity. Again, how long is it going to wait between interruptions? How sensitive is its tracking? High-res zoom speed. If you're going to do that high-resolution zoom where it's zooming in on the image sensor, and in this camera, again, you have to be in 1080p, a lower resolution video to be able to do that on the 4K style sensor. It's actually a 6K sensor, but you can't do it in 4K. You have to be in 1080p. You can control the speed. 0 is the center. Power zoom buttons, same thing as with the still shooting if you have a power zoom lens. Fine ISO control, you can do a 1/6 of a stop here for video because sometimes you want to just shift exposure a little bit without it being noticeable. So having fine ISO control and 1/6 of a stop can be handy for video shooters. Extended shutter speeds, I don't really use that in video, but you've got the capability. View assists, I put those on, and some of those view assists we have zebra patterns. You can see the sort of moving patterns where things are overexposed in the frame, and you can set what is the pattern, left to right, right to left. What's the threshold, in red, green, and blue color tones? If everything is at 250, 250, 250, you want to go ahead and notice anything in that highest realm possible is being blown out. You've overexposed. Overexposed is, of course, lost information. Your zebra tone pattern range, I like it to be in the highlights. I don't want midtones. Again, grid type, just like still shooting, 3x3. Brightness information display, you can choose a waveform. I actually haven't changed this yet, but I like a small sized waveform for video. It's much like a histogram, but it sort of shows time moving through the frame in a way that a histogram shifting around doesn't. So you can sort of see what's happened a second or two ago and what's happening now. Video shooters tend to like waveforms. It takes a little getting used to, but I like it. I love that they have that. Half press to cancel manual focus zoom. This is, again, much to do with the zooming in to check focus and then half pressing to get out of it. Custom monitor shooting display, it's just the same as stills. I've got them kind of reversed here. All the information on display 1, a little less information on display 2, almost no information except what I need, the microphone levels and the waveform or histogram and the level view. You can customize these to taste. The viewfinder, same thing. Lots of information, about half as much information. Almost no distraction is just what I need. Those are, when you press the display button, you'll cycle through those. Red frame indicator. This is really nice. It puts a red frame around the monitor and in the viewfinder when you're recording to make it really obvious that you're recording. So, it avoids those old errors of, I thought I hit record, but I didn't. Okay, that's it for the custom settings. We made it through. Playback is super fast. We're through the bulk of these things. I know this is a long video, but we're getting there. In the playback menu, you can go in and delete all the pictures on your card or candidates for deletion or different parameters. I use this a lot shooting sports action and wildlife. I mark the keepers. I run through zoomed in, looking at the different images that I captured from a series, mark the best ones, and then delete everything but the ones that are marked as locked. When you delete, it will not delete locked images. Playback folder. Dude, I just have it playback all the folders. You can select different folders to playback. Playback display options. This is important. I tend to turn off all of these different things except I want the RGB histogram and I want no view at all. And what that gives me when I hit playback is a view of just the image and a view of the red, green, and blue histogram, right? So there's always going to be sort of a here's your image and its title and when it was captured. Here we have the red, green, and blue histogram, and here we have just the image to have a look at. Pike mowing on a sandwich. I was testing a lens out. All right, so just some little captures of my family there. So that's my choice for playback display options. Some people like to see highlights and where the focus point is. I like just a few quick selections. Delete pictures from both slots. This is for if you're shooting with both slots to backup. I would leave that on if you are. Dual format recording playback slot. So if you're shooting to both cards at the same time, which one do you want to play back from? Filtered playback criteria. You can go in and say, I only want to see images that are, say, protected, blah, 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 blah. Series playback, when you're capturing bursts, the sub selector can display the first shot. I like to turn off that automatic playback. In the automatic playback options, the loop playback, I like it turned off. This will sort of automatically play a series of images captured in continuous burst as if they're a little movie through the viewfinder. List series of single thumbnails. I just like to see every image and run through and select the best ones and delete the rest. Picture review off. This is when you take the frame and then it shows you the photo you just took in the viewfinder or on the monitor. Drives me crazy. Some people like it. After delete, when you're running through, by default, it says show the next picture. So it would always be going to the right. You can have it show the previous picture. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. What I like is continue as before. So if you're moving to the left and you delete a frame, it goes to the next frame to the left. If you're moving to the right and you delete a frame, it goes to the next frame to the right. That should be the default to me. After a burst, show the first picture of the burst or the last picture of the burst. For me, it's the last picture of the burst. Record the camera orientation. Absolutely. That way, when you bring it into post-production software, it rotates the images correctly. Auto-rotate pictures. I really don't like this because what happens is I shoot a lot of vertical frames, and when it auto-rotates the pictures for playback, it shows them to me really tiny in the horizontal playback. When I'm comfortably holding the camera reviewing images, I'd rather turn the camera and look at the vertical images big on the monitor or in my viewfinder. Copy images. You can copy images and paste them and move them around. That's the playback menu. Setup menu. You can format your memory card. This is one that we're going to put some of this stuff in the My menu. This is one I use all the time. You want to occasionally format your memory card, say every week or so or every few days in order to just keep them running optimally. Save user settings. This is where you set up the user 1, user 2, user 3 modes. We'll talk about that in the next video. Reset user settings. This would blow all of those, any of them up to where they're back to default. The language, you can go in and change it from English. Time zone and date, you can set that. Monitor brightness, you can adjust your monitor brightness. Monitor color balance, you can adjust the monitor color balance. I think it's pretty great out of the box. Viewfinder brightness, I tend to leave that on auto. It does a good job determining how bright it should be. Viewfinder color balance, you can go in and tweak it. You have to, so you got to look through the viewfinder to do that. We can go back. You hit menu. If we were doing monitor color balance, this is how you can see. You can move around to change the tint and the white balance. We'll not do that. I like it stock, as I said. Viewfinder display size, you wonder, why would you want it small? Well, maybe you use glasses, and with your glasses, you can't quite see the entire inside of the viewfinder. You can make the display a little bit smaller so that you see the whole thing. Limit monitor mode selection. This is something I don't generally do, but you could turn off certain monitor modes. In the monitor modes, we got monitor only, automatic display switch. I don't know why mine's grayed out right now. It's probably because I'm running HDMI out. But by pressing these different buttons on the side of the monitor, you can flip back and forth. I'm going to use monitor only right now so that putting my hand in front of the viewfinder doesn't interrupt our display. Auto rotate information display. This is really cool. So all of the settings and everything that you see, Nikon has it so that when you rotate to vertical, to shoot in portrait orientation, all of the text and everything rotates with you so that it stays, you don't have to be reading it sideways. That's a cool new thing that came with the Z cameras. AF fine-tuning options. This is something I don't find I need to do for any of the lenses on the Nikon Z cameras, because it's focusing on what the sensor sees, and that means that it's focusing accurately with all the lenses. It's not tuning the autofocus system to the lens's focus system. It's not some rangefinder system. It's actually focusing what the image displayed on the sensor is from the lens, so it's much more accurate than the old F-mount series. Non-CPU lens data. This is for when you're using old school lenses that don't have electronic contacts. You can go in and tell it the lens number 1 is such and such a focal length and such a maximum aperture, and name it. And then you just have to select which one you have on the camera when you're working with legacy lenses. Distance units, you can choose meters or feet. I like meters. Save focus position. This is an important one. People think, well, that would be really good, right? If I focus to some distance and I turn the camera on and off, it'll focus right back where I was. And that's true in certain situations. But one of the things people don't realize is that if you leave this turned off and you turn the camera off and turn it back on, it automatically focuses to infinity. And it's ridiculously accurate at it with modern lenses. So when I'm out photographing the Milky Way with my 21.8 or my 14 to 24, all I do to get the stars in focus is turn the camera off and turn it back on, as long as save focus position is turned off. And I've tested it over and over again, manually focusing, auto-focusing on bright stars or planets or a barn light in the distance. Just as good turning the camera off, turning it back on. It's wonderful. Save zoom position for power zoom lenses. Auto temperature cutout. You can tell it to not cut out until the temperature is quite high or standard, to make your camera last a little longer if you're doing a lot of long video recording. Clean image sensor, that just shakes the sensor to clean dust off. Image dust off reference photo. That's for if you want to take a photo of all the dust on your sensor and have it eliminated or helped in post-production. Pixel mapping, that just maps where there's dead pixels as the sensor ages. If somewhere down the road you're starting to have a few dead pixels 10 years from now, you can pixel map and it'll eliminate those from the images, average them out. You can make comments on your images. You can add copyright information to all your images. I tend to do that when I bring my images into Lightroom Classic. You can edit the metadata information going into your images right here. You can set it up so that the headphone connection is either only for headphones, or that it'll automatically switch between headphones and the remote control, the wired remote control you can buy for this. There's different options for how you record voice memos. I don't generally put voice memos on my images. You can customize the camera's sounds. Personally, I like to leave them turned off. You can turn on silent mode, turn off silent mode. You can turn touch controls on and off. I tend to like them on. You can make them a little bit more sensitive for when you're wearing gloves, which is nice. There's a self-portrait mode. Self-portrait mode just turns off all the camera's controls when you tilt the screen towards yourself to see yourself. I don't tend to use it, but HDMI has controls for what's going on. Like right now I have it outputting shooting information because I'm outputting what you're looking at through HDMI, but you can turn that off so that it can go to an external recorder. There's lots of different settings here, and there's a question mark there so you can read about them. USB connection priority can be upload or shooting. If you're shooting tethered, go to shooting. Conformity marking is just information about the camera, all these kinds of battery information lets you look at the current battery that you're working with, and how's its health. USB power delivery, that's how I'm powering the camera through this whole thing. I have a battery brick, which I recommend, and I list in my links with this camera. If you run into this video's full description or over to my website, like I've talked about earlier, over at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links, you'll see the different recommended accessories like this one, which is powering the camera indefinitely. You could shoot all night doing star work or time lapses plugged into the USB-C port, as long as you have the right power delivery capable battery bank. You have to turn that setting on. Energy saving just makes your battery last longer. It turns off a number of things that suck battery. Your camera might not perform quite as brilliantly, but it'll save battery. This slot empty release lock, always from the factory, it comes with OK, and it lets you feel like you're taking pictures when there's no memory card. I'd rather have it not take a picture and tell me you have no memory card, so I leave it unlocked. Save and load menu settings. Here is a critical one. You go in here and you say save menu settings, and all the work that we've just done gets saved to a little bin file on your memory card. Now remember, if you format your memory card, you'll lose that bin file, but you can pull it out and back it up to your computer. This would let you reload all the settings in. This is the file that I'm sharing with all of my settings for you to follow along here. This is how you save it right there. Boom, save. Reset all settings, that takes you back to factory defaults. Firmware version lets you see the firmware or upload firmware if you have firmware on your memory card to update. The network menu lets you turn on airplane mode so there's no Bluetooth or Wi-Fi going on. Lets you connect to Nikon's imaging cloud. I don't use that. Lets you connect to your smartphone for Snap Bridge, which is a great little app that can automatically sync time and add GPS data to your images when you're connected to your phone. Options for connecting the little MLL7 wired remote control in through the headphone jack. Different options for that remote controller. Lets you connect to a computer, an FTP server, or another camera, or an Adamus external recorder, or USB, different types of USB connections. Connect directly to routers and computers, all those kinds of complicated settings. These are mostly used by, say, reporters in the field connecting into their stringer service. All right, so coming down here to My Menu. All right, this is one where we're going to put things in here that we use all the time and we want quick access to, and we don't want to have to remember where in all these menus that we just went through are these things. This is where I live in the menus because the things I change are all here. And if you go to the very bottom of this menu, you can actually go up to get to the bottom of it. When you first open up your camera, you'll have nothing in here. It'll just be add, remove, rank, right? Rank lets you change positions. Add lets you add items from the menu. Remove lets you get rid of things. I could say I want to get rid of that. I don't really, but I could. And then I could delete different items from the list. Rank items lets me say, oh, I'd rather move airplane mode down one. See that? Oh, I'll move it back up where it was before. Boom. All right. Add items, you just jump in to, say, the custom settings menu and the timers section and say, I'd like to add self timer. Where do you want to put it? We'll put it down here near, I don't know, custom controls. Boom. Now it's in there. Okay. It's that easy. So I'm just going to show you what I have chosen to put in my menu. I put airplane mode at the top because any of these menus with a little arrow to the right, when you load the My Menu, it automatically throws you into that second level of the menu. If you use a shortcut button to get into the My Menu, it takes you to the sub menu. So I just put airplane mode at the top, and there's times where I want to turn off all my communications. You know, if I'm in some place I don't want to be GPS tagging because I don't want to share the location because it's sensitive, I'll turn this off. And that way, or I'll turn it on, and that way it's not communicating with my phone through SnapBridge and auto GPS tagging everything. Save load menu settings. We just talked about that. I want to save my menu settings all the time. Format memory card. So before I format my memory card, I would go in here and load my menu settings off the card so I have my base settings locked in. And then, so all the settings are locked into the camera, then I format my memory card and then save settings again. So it's load, format, save, because you're tweaking settings all the time. As you're moving around, these saved settings can act as a base position for you to always get back to. Silent mode, something that sometimes I want to just be quiet. Pixel shift shooting. Every now and then I want to use it, it's there. Focus peaking. Sometimes I do want to turn it on and see what all appears to be in focus when I'm like at F11 trying to get everything in the landscape in focus. I don't love it, but now and then I do use it. Manual focus subject detection area. Sometimes I want to flip to the whole view, the whole sensor. Sometimes I want wide area, sometimes I want small. Starlight view, when I'm out shooting Milky Way and night photography, I want to be able to turn that on and off as well as warm display colors really quickly and easily. Custom controls for shooting. This way I can go in and tweak settings if I want in a given situation. Self timer, turn it on to do a group selfie shot in a workshop. AF activation, in case I hand the camera to somebody I know doesn't understand back button focusing. Somebody says, hey, can I take all your picture? I run in here and I turn shutter back onto the shutter button. And that way, when they press the shutter, it focuses because most people are used to that. Custom controls for video, easily accessed from here, right? Same as custom controls for photo. Power off delay, because I'm constantly doing these kinds of videos. It lets me go in and tweak those settings really easily. Connect to smart device. This lets me connect to my phone really quickly and easily. Save focus position. Every now and then, I do want the camera to remember the focus position after I turn it off and back on. Most of the time not, so that it snaps to infinity, but not always. Pre-release capture options. I can change that pre-release burst to capture longer or less. I can capture the post-release burst to capture more than a second. That way, the minute I flip into C15 or C30, I'm where I want to be. Flash control. If I had a flash on, this would be active and I could do the flash control work. Monitor brightness. I might want to adjust the monitor during blue hour to be dimmer or during really harsh daylight to be brighter. USB connection priority. Maybe I'm going to shoot tethered. And then that's it. So that is the whole menu roll. Now, there will be firmware updates for this camera that come periodically. In my YouTube channel, I create playlists for the different cameras. So my review, my initial thoughts about this camera, my first hands-on video, these setup videos will all be in that playlist. And subsequently, when Nikon comes out with firmware and I make adjustments, I will update my settings file so that you can download the new settings file, and I'll walk through what's changed in the firmware in subsequent videos without recreating this entire video. This is the base video for that, all right? So look for those. Also, this is part 1 of 2. In the next video, it'll be much shorter. We're going to take these base settings that we've gone through and created, and we're going to tweak them for user 3 mode so that we have a set of settings instantly accessible for sports, action, and wildlife scenarios. And also user 2, we're going to flip to be a landscape focused user mode. And I'll show you exactly how to do that from start to finish. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please hit like, please share, subscribe. I appreciate it. We do a lot of Nikon content on this channel, as well as just general photography content. Put a video out every single Thursday, approaching the scene video. If you enjoyed this, again, thanks so much for watching. And enjoy your new camera. It's awesome. Oh, really quick, you can hit this link right here to go to part 2, to the user mode setup videos. All right, thanks so much for watching.